In a small town, a black mechanic lived a quiet life, shunned by the community. One day, he met a 10-year-old boy riding a broken bicycle to school, living with his frail grandmother. The man called him over and fixed the bike for free. But then his grandmother passed away, and he was taken to an orphanage. Years later, he returned as someone entirely different, a CEO. He brought the mechanic home and called him father. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thoughts. There was a forgotten corner at the edge of a small southern town, where time moved slower and kindness was often buried under layers of rust and suspicion. A narrow road curved past overgrown lots, a crumbling gas station, and a diner that still displayed a faded "Whites Only" sign in its storage window. Left there, they claimed, as a reminder, though no one ever took it down. Children crossed the street to avoid the sidewalk outside the shop with peeling blue paint. Dogs barked when they passed by, and grown men lowered their voices when they mentioned the man who lived there alone. The place was called Earl's Garage, though no one ever called him Earl to his face. Some called him the old black mechanic, others just that guy. Most pretended he wasn't there at all. He didn't advertise, didn't ask for business, and didn't step inside the diner across the street, even when it rained. He didn't belong there, and everyone made sure he knew it. The garage itself was a relic from another time. Its sign half faded, its windows smudged with dust and time. A tin bell over the door had long since rusted into silence. Inside it smelled of oil, rubber, and something softer. Maybe coffee grounds or old leather. Rows of tools hung with quiet pride, each in its place, untouched by mess. There was a small cot in the back room, a single coat on the hook, and a radio that played old soul songs on low volume, as if afraid to disturb the air. Earl was in his early 50s, though he looked older in the harsh southern light, his skin dark and sun-creased, hands wide and calloused like bark. He always wore the same thing, a dark green jumpsuit smeared with grease, sleeves rolled to the elbow, and a black knit cap even on the hottest days. He didn't smile much, and when he did, it came slowly, like an engine learning to turn over after a long cold spell. He didn't talk about where he came from, or why he never left the town that barely tolerated his presence. Maybe it was because of the memories sealed behind the garage door, or maybe because he'd seen too much of the world to believe any other place would be kinder. Either way, he worked, quietly, thoroughly, with a patience most people no longer had time for. He never refused a customer, though few came. Those who did, mostly other black folks or young men who hadn't yet learned to judge a man by the color of his skin, always left with their cars running smoother than they expected. And when someone spit near his feet or called him boy, he didn't flinch. He simply turned back to his work. Most days passed without a word, just the soft squeak of a ratchet, the hum of old blues drifting through the shop, and the occasional breeze carrying dust through the open bay doors. It was a life built on silence and survival. But that was before the boy. Before the sound of bent wheels on cracked pavement broke the rhythm, before something small and unexpected nudged open the door Earl had long kept shut. Not the one made of wood and rusted hinges, but the one inside him that still remembered how to care. It was a Tuesday afternoon when Earl first noticed the boy. The sun hung low and heavy, bleeding gold over the rooftops and laying long shadows across the street. Earl was at the edge of his garage, sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped white mug, his eyes drifting past the traffic light that hadn't worked in 5 years. That's when he heard the sound. A dry, scraping thump, like rubber flapping against gravel. He turned, slow and deliberate, and saw the boy coming up the road. The bike was barely holding together, one wheel crook, the other nearly bald, the chain skipping every few feet. The boy hunched low, pumping the pedals with short, stubborn motions. His backpack bounced against his shoulders, frayed at the edges and patched with duct tape. He didn't look up as he passed. Earl just watched. The next day, the boy came by again. Same bike, same struggle, same silence. By the third day, the sound of that busted wheel felt like a knock on Earl's chest. Not loud, just persistent. When the boy passed by that afternoon, pushing the bike instead of riding it, Earl stepped out farther than usual. "Hey," he called, not loud but clear. The boy stopped, startled. He looked no older than 10, small for his age, dust on his cheeks, shoes too big, one red, one blue, both worn thin. He blinked toward the voice, cautious. "That thing's got nothing left on it," Earl said, nodding toward the bike. "You're gonna break your legs before you get to wherever you're going." The boy shifted, clutching the handlebars like they were an anchor. "I'm fine," he said quickly. His voice was soft but firm, the kind of voice that had learned to survive without asking for much. "It still rolls." Earl took a slow step forward, wiping his hands on a rag. "Where you headed?" "Home," the boy answered, eyes flicking toward the cracked sidewalk behind him. "From school. I live with my grandma. She's sick. I gotta cook for her." Earl didn't reply right away. He looked down at the bent wheel, then back up at the boy. "Bring it here. I'll take a look." The boy hesitated. "I don't got money." Earl gave a dry huff of breath, somewhere between a chuckle and a sigh. "Ain't about money. I got some parts folks left behind. Stuff too busted for them, not too busted for me." He pointed toward the shop. "Come on. Won't take long." Still, the boy didn't move. Earl studied him more carefully now. His shirt was 2 sizes too big, sleeves rolled up past the elbows. There was a rip near the collar, stitched by hand. His knees were scraped. The way he stood, straight-backed, guarded but polite, reminded Earl of something. Someone. Maybe just himself a long time ago. "I don't bite, kid," Earl said. "You can wait by the door if that feels better." The boy nodded once, then slowly rolled the bike into the shade of the shop. He stayed just outside, standing stiff like a soldier at post, backpack hugged tight to his chest. Earl crouched down beside the bike, gently twisting the front fork, checking the spokes. The rim was bent, the inner tube beyond patching. But he had a spare, somewhere in the back. He always did. "What's your name?" Earl asked, not looking up. "Marcus?" "You talk like a grown man, Marcus." The boy didn't answer. Earl didn't expect him to. He disappeared into the garage for a moment, came back with a dusty tire and a new inner tube. He worked in silence, his hands moving with quiet precision. The boy watched every motion like it was a lesson being given just for him. After a while, Earl spoke again. "You always ride that far to school?" "Yeah." "How far is it?" "About 3 miles, maybe more." Earl glanced up. "Every day?" Marcus nodded. "And your grandma don't drive?" "She can't walk much. I leave food before I go." Earl didn't say anything after that. He just worked faster. By the time the new tire was on and the frame straightened, the sun had dropped behind the buildings and cast long amber shadows across the floor. Earl wiped his hands, then stepped back. "There," he said. "Won't win you any races, but it'll get you home without throwing you off." Marcus stepped forward, cautious, touching the handlebars like he didn't want to disturb the fix. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You hungry?" Earl asked, surprising even himself. Marcus shook his head. "No, I need to get back. Grandma might be waiting." Earl nodded once. "Come by if it starts acting up again, or if anything else breaks." Marcus paused, looking up. "You sure I don't owe you?" Earl met his eyes. "You already paid me. You listened." The boy stared at him for a beat, then gave the smallest smile, barely there, but enough. He climbed onto the bike, balanced it for a second, then pedaled off. The wheels rolled smoother now, whispering against the pavement. Earl watched until he disappeared down the road. That night, Earl didn't turn on the radio. He sat on the steps outside the shop, mug empty in his hand, thinking about the boy with the mismatched shoes and the steady eyes. He didn't know why it stuck with him so much. Maybe because no one else had ever stood that straight in front of him before. Maybe because no one else had looked at him with quiet trust instead of fear or pity. He didn't expect to see Marcus again. Most people passed through, some never looked back. That's how things were in this town, especially for men like Earl. He had learned not to expect much from others. But something about the way that kid held his backpack, the way he said thank you like it actually mattered, settled into Earl's chest and stayed there. Like the sound of that broken wheel. Quiet but persistent. Earl didn't expect the boy to come back, not really. People didn't return to places like his, not unless they had to. But 3 days after he'd fixed the bike, Earl stepped out to sweep the sidewalk and found a neat little row of rusty bolts lined up on the porch railing. They were old parts, worthless, but each one had been polished clean, as if someone had sat with a rag and a purpose. He squinted toward the road, but no one was there, only a breeze and the faint scent of pine. The next day, the boy came in person. He didn't say much. Just showed up while Earl was deep in an oil change and quietly began organizing the pile of tools near the wall. He didn't ask for permission, didn't speak unless spoken to. He just worked, like it was something he'd always done. Earl watched him out of the corner of his eye, careful not to spook him. The boy's movements were deliberate, focused, precise in a way most grown men weren't. He didn't fidget, didn't complain about the heat or the smell. He wore the same shirt, still patched at the collar, and those mismatched shoes, one of them flapping slightly with every step. When Earl finally spoke, it was simple. "You know the difference between a socket and a box wrench?" Marcus nodded. "Kinda. I seen videos." Earl handed him both, nodded toward the shelf. "Sort 'em, small to big, keep the teeth clean." That was how it started. No arrangement, no deal, no talk of payment. Just two people in the same space, moving around each other like old tools in a drawer, well worn and useful even if a little bent. Over the next few weeks, Marcus came by nearly every afternoon. Not every day, but often enough that Earl noticed when he didn't. He'd arrive sometime between 3 and 4, usually right after school, and stay for an hour or so. Never long enough to be a bother, never short enough to feel like nothing. Sometimes he swept the floor. Sometimes he wiped down the old tires leaning against the wall. He never touched anything without checking first. He always asked questions with his eyes, never his mouth. One Friday, while Earl was adjusting a carburetor on a '93 Chevy, he looked up and found Marcus watching him closely, arms crossed over his chest, backpack resting at his feet. Earl raised an eyebrow. "You ever want to learn this for real?" Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I think I do." Earl motioned him over. "Bring that stool." That afternoon, Earl taught him how to change oil without spilling a drop. He showed him how to listen, really listen, to the hum of an engine, to the way metal talks when it's tired. Marcus took it in like a sponge, nodding when he understood, tilting his head when he didn't. There was something in the boy's focus, a kind of reverence, as if what Earl did was art, not labor. As days passed, their silences became conversations in themselves. Earl didn't ask about school, or about home, or about the grandmother Marcus always mentioned in passing. He didn't need to. The boy's eyes said enough. Some days they held a weight that felt too old for 10. Other days there was a spark, a flicker of joy that came when a bolt came loose on the first try, or when Earl gave a rare nod of approval. One late afternoon, Earl was closing up when Marcus lingered at the threshold. "You ever built a car from scratch?" he asked, voice low. Earl scratched his chin. "Once. Long time ago. Why?" Marcus shrugged, toes scuffing the concrete. I think I want to do that. One day, build something that's mine." Earl looked at him then, not just glanced, but really looked. The boy stood tall despite his size, like his body was still catching up to the weight of his own dreams. His backpack had a new rip, taped up with a strip of cereal box cardboard, but he stood with pride, with a kind of quiet dignity Earl hadn't seen in years. "You learn how things work," Earl said. "You learn what they need. That's all building is, just listening real close, and not rushing what's not ready." Marcus smiled, small and sure. "Okay." The next week, Earl cleared a corner of the garage, made space, brought out a busted lawnmower engine and set it on a crate. "Start here," he said simply. "Take it apart, figure out how it breathes." It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't mentorship. It was just a door opening. And still, Marcus gave more than he took. He showed up on days when Earl's knees ached and quietly took over without a word. He swept without being told. Once, Earl came back from the diner, not to eat, just to pick up coffee through the side window, and found the boy fixing the bent leg on the shop's folding table with nothing but a screwdriver and some scrap wood. He was never in the way, and yet the space felt different when he was there, warmer, lighter, but the town noticed too. A white man from the hardware store glanced across the street one day and muttered under his breath, loud enough for Earl to hear, "Shouldn't be teaching him too much. Next thing you know, he'll think he owns the place." The world didn't react, not on the outside. But that night, as he sat on the back step smoking a rare cigarette, the words gnawed at him. Not because they surprised him, nothing surprised him anymore, but because of what they meant for the boy. The world was already trying to cut Marcus down before he had even begun to stand tall. Earl had lived enough years to know that every kind gesture had a cost when it came from a black hand in a white town. But when he looked over and saw the faint smudge of grease still on the doorknob, Marcus's handiwork from earlier, he figured some things were worth the trouble. He'd never had a son. Never thought he wanted one. But there was something about the way Marcus treated a wrench like a promise, a bolt like a puzzle, that made Earl feel like maybe, just maybe, this shop might outlive him after all. That thought stayed with him as the days slipped by, as summer tipped into the edge of fall and the wind started to change. The boy still came, still worked, still watched, and Earl, without meaning to, found himself listening more closely, not just to the sounds of the engines, but to the silence when Marcus left, and the way the place felt different in his absence, as if something had been set in motion, something fragile, something good. It started with a late arrival. Marcus didn't show up until nearly dusk that Friday, and when he did, his face was drawn, his eyes swollen from crying, though he tried to hide it behind his usual quiet. Earl was under the hood of an old pickup, half buried in a mess of wires, but the moment he saw the boy's silhouette at the door, he knew something was wrong. Marcus stood still for a long beat, backpack in hand, shoulders stiff. Then he finally stepped inside, setting the bag down in the corner like always. He didn't speak, just picked up a broom and began sweeping in tight, silent circles. Earl didn't ask, not right away. Some things came out better on their own time. He just watched for a while, listened to the rough swish of bristles on concrete, the occasional sniffle the boy couldn't hide. When the sun dipped fully below the horizon and only the garage's yellow bulb buzzed overhead, Earl walked over and set a hand gently on Marcus's shoulder. "You eat?" Marcus shook his head without looking up. Earl motioned to the stool by the workbench. "Sit." "I got some." He didn't have much, just a can of beans heated over a hot plate, 2 slices of bread, a couple old apples, but he made a plate and handed it over without ceremony. Marcus hesitated, then took it with both hands, murmured a soft thank you, and began eating without another word. Only after the last bite was gone did he speak. "She's gone." The words dropped like a wrench on tile. Earl didn't respond, just waited. Marcus stared down at the plate. "My grandma. She didn't wake up this morning. I tried to make her oatmeal like always. I thought she was just sleeping late. But she was cold. Real cold." Earl swallowed. He had no words that could fix the weight in the boy's voice. "I'm sorry," he said softly, the words falling useless into the thick, silent air. Marcus nodded, his fingers tightening around the edge of the stool. "I called the neighbor. She called someone else. Then people came. A van with no lights. They took her away. And then some lady in glasses showed up and started talking real fast, saying I had to pack a bag." His voice cracked there, just slightly. "She said I couldn't stay." Earl sat down slowly across from him. "They taken you somewhere?" "To some center. She said it's for kids like me. I don't want to go." "Did they say where?" "Someplace over in West Pine, 40 minutes out." He wiped his nose with his sleeve. "I asked if I could just stay here a few days, said I knew someone who could maybe help. But they wouldn't listen. They already had a car waiting." Earl's hands curled into fists in his lap. "They still here?" Marcus nodded. "Down the road. She let me come say goodbye. I told her it was just a garage. She don't know about all this." For a moment, the only sound was the tick of the wall clock, slightly offbeat. Then Marcus stood and walked to the back corner of the shop, where they'd been rebuilding the lawnmower engine together. He reached into his bag and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. Unfolding it carefully, he revealed a pair of gloves, old, cracked leather, clearly used. "They were my granddad's," he said. "I was saving them for when I learned how to build something real. But I think they'd be better here." Earl didn't speak. He just took the gloves when the boy held them out and turned them over slowly in his hands. They were soft, familiar in a way that caught him off guard. "You don't owe me nothing, Marcus," he said, his voice low. "I know," Marcus whispered. "I just don't want to forget." Then he walked to his bike. Still the same one Earl had fixed weeks ago, only now with a new bell, probably something Marcus had added from a junkyard find, and looked at it like it was too small for what he carried now. "I can't take it with me," he said. "They don't let kids ride out there." Earl stepped forward. "I'll keep it here, in case you come back." Marcus nodded, blinking hard. "You will?" "I will." A car horn honked softly from the corner of the street. Marcus turned to go, then paused at the door. He looked up at Earl one last time, his voice barely above a breath. "Thank you. For everything." And then he was gone. Earl stood in the doorway long after the car disappeared down the road, the light from the taillights swallowed by darkness. The silence that followed was different than the quiet he was used to. This one hollowed out the walls, made the tools seem heavier, the air thicker. That night, Earl didn't touch the hot plate. He didn't turn on the radio or pour a drink or check the bolts on the workbench like he usually did before bed. Instead, he sat alone at the corner of the shop where Marcus had once lined up those bolts like treasures, and he held the boy's gloves in his hands like something sacred. He thought of all the things he could have said, all the ways he might have tried to fight for the boy to stay. But he also knew this town, knew its rules, knew what it did to boys like Marcus who didn't have anyone to speak for them. He'd tried once before, years ago, with someone else, someone who didn't stay. He told himself then he was done opening doors that would only be slammed shut. But this had been different. This had crept in slowly, wrapped itself around him with oil-stained fingers and soft-spoken questions and the quiet kind of gratitude that didn't ask for more. The shop felt bigger now, too big. The bike stood alone near the far wall, tires still firm, seat still clean. Earl covered it with a sheet, careful not to tangle the chain. Then he turned off the lights and stood in the doorway a while longer, watching the night, listening for nothing. Because nothing was all there was. And yet, somewhere deep down, a small part of him didn't believe that goodbye was the end. Not really, just a pause, a quiet, before something turned over again. Years passed the way they always did in small towns. Quietly, without asking permission. The garage stayed the same, more or less. Earl kept fixing what came through the door, though fewer people came by these days. The radio still played soft soul music, the tin bell above the entrance still didn't ring. And the tools stayed lined up in perfect rows, just the way Marcus had once arranged them. The boy's gloves sat in a small wooden box behind the counter, and the bike, carefully maintained though never ridden again, leaned under a drop cloth near the back wall. Some days Earl would glance at it, then look away quickly, as if not to disturb something sleeping. He didn't talk about Marcus to anyone, not that anyone asked. But sometimes, when he was working late and the air was still, he'd think about the way the boy watched him. Head tilted, hands folded over his knees, like he was studying not just the work, but the man doing it. Earl never admitted it, but in those first months after Marcus left, he checked the mailbox more often than usual, hoping for a postcard or a letter. Nothing came. Over time, he told himself it was better that way. Maybe the boy forgot. Maybe forgetting was easier. Then, one spring morning, warm air pushing against the cold like it had somewhere to be, Earl heard the low purr of an engine pull up outside the shop. He looked up from the carburetor he was adjusting, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his wrist. The car that stopped outside didn't belong in this town. It was sleek, all angles and shine. The kind of vehicle that turned heads even if no one dared to walk up to. A black luxury sedan, spotless, humming with quiet power. It idled for a second, then shut off, the door open. A man stepped out, tall, clean-cut, in a navy suit that looked like it cost more than Earl's monthly rent. For a split second, Earl thought he had the wrong address. Then the man looked up, and the shape of his face, the familiar stillness in his eyes, took Earl's breath. "Marcus?" he said before he even meant to. The man smiled. It wasn't a big smile, but it was real and it carried years inside it. "Hey, Earl." Earl stepped forward slowly, not trusting his legs. You're taller than I figured you'd be." Marcus chuckled. "You're exactly how I remember." They stood facing each other, years of silence thick between them, until Earl finally found the courage to ask, What brings you back?" Marcus stepped closer, pulling something from the inside pocket of his jacket, a folded article. He handed it to Earl. On the front was a glossy photo, Marcus standing in front of a brand-new automotive plant cutting a ribbon. The headline read, "Local startup shocks industry, young CEO leads electric innovation." Earl stared at it, trying to make sense of the boy he'd fed beans to, now standing with mayors and governors. "This is yours?" "All of it," Marcus said. "The design, the plant, the hiring program. We even started a vocational school tied to the company." Earl shook his head slowly, disbelief and quiet pride wrestling in his chest. "You built all that?" Marcus nodded, piece by piece. "Like you taught me." Earl felt something catch in his throat but swallowed it down. "Why now?" he asked, almost afraid of the answer. "I've been looking for you," Marcus said, softer now. "It took time. The shop wasn't listed anywhere. You didn't leave much of a trail, but I never forgot." He paused, then added, "I wanted to come back when I had something to offer. when I could ask you something without it sounding like charity." Earl folded the article carefully, hands trembling, then looked back at the man in front of him. "You don't owe me anything, son." Marcus took a step closer. "I know, but I still want to give you something. A place. A home." Earl blinked, caught off guard. "You got a family now?" "I do," Marcus said, his smile softening. "Wife, 2 boys. One of them just started trying to take apart the toaster." He laughed, then grew serious again. "We have a house with a full garage, but it doesn't feel right, not without you in it." Earl didn't answer. His chest felt tight in a way he hadn't allowed for years. "I want you to come live with us," Marcus continued. "There's a workshop waiting. You'd be part of the company if you wanted. Or not. You could just rest, be with us." "Be my family." Earl's voice came low and rough. "You already got a father, Marcus." Marcus shook his head. "No. I had a grandfather who died before I knew what the word meant. I had a town that looked right through me, but I never had someone who saw me the way you did, who gave me something and never asked for anything back. I don't know what to call that except father." The word landed between them like thunder. Not loud, but shaking everything underneath. For a long time Earl said nothing. He looked down at his hands, still stained with grease, still worn from years of holding things together that wanted to fall apart. Then he looked up, into the eyes of the boy who had once swept his shop in mismatched shoes, and nodded slowly. "You still got that bike?" he asked, voice breaking just slightly. Marcus smiled. "You kept it?" Earl turned toward the back wall. "Never touched it. Been waiting for someone to come ride it home." Marcus's eyes glossed, and for a moment neither of them moved. Then Marcus crossed the space between them and wrapped his arms around the Earl, not a boy hugging a man, but a man embracing the only father he'd ever known. They stood like that for a while. No need for words. Later that week, Earl closed the shop for good. They packed the tools together, every wrench and socket wrapped with care, the gloves placed last on top of the box like a seal. The sign stayed up, though, the faded Earl's Garage still hanging above the door. Marcus said it should stay as a tribute. But at the new home, in a gleaming new workshop with polished floors and bright lights, there was a fresh sign above the bench where Earl liked to sit. It read, "Earl's First Garage." Because every beginning deserves to be remembered, and every quiet act of love deserves to echo for a lifetime. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.